Hi there, and thank you for joining us on TalentMap's Municipal webinar. I appreciate you guys taking your time out of your day to sit through and listen to a edited version and recording of our Municipal webinar that we did just a few weeks back. Appreciate you all joining us, and thank you again for your interest in employee engagement in the municipal sector. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sharing a little bit about a topic that we discussed on our webinar, changing municipal employees from satisfied to engaged. And we've received a lot of really good feedback from this, and hopefully you guys can take the next 25 minutes and listen to this and hopefully take something from this and take this back with you guys in your workplace. I appreciate you guys again joining us. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes just introducing our topic today and our speaker today, and then we'll walk through the webinar presentation. Then we'll actually go through the questions that were asked at the end of our recording, and well, hopefully you guys will be able to take something from that there. So like I said, today we're going to be sharing on changing employees from satisfied to engaged in the municipal sector. And over the past couple months, we've been in contact with many municipalities across Canada, and we actually had over 50 municipalities sit in and listen to our webinar live. So it was a great turnout, and it seems like a very relevant and engaging topic for a lot of the municipalities out there. And some of the things that we've been hearing over the past few months is that employee engagement is really something that is beginning to drive and stir within the municipal sector, and a lot of organizations are really looking into this. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to sit together and share on how to change employees from satisfied to engaged. And today our speaker is TalentMap's President Sean Fitzpatrick, and he is an expert in this topic today that we're going to be discussing. And he's had over 15 years working within the municipal sector, improving and helping municipalities to grow and to launch further into developing employee engagement within their municipal areas. And he has a wealth of experience and knowledge in regards to this topic today. And it's a great pleasure that we have Sean today to be able to walk us through this. So I'll let Sean take it from here. Thank you, Sean, for joining us.
Good. Thanks, Neil, and thanks for the quick introduction in setting up this webinar. Before I jump into the topic, I do want to just touch on a slide or two who TalentMap is. Some of the attendees on the call today recognize TalentMap because we've had an opportunity to work with different municipalities, but I also noticed that there's some new ones that we haven't had a chance to work with before. So a little bit of background around TalentMap. We've been in this business on employee engagement for over 15 years, and we do thousands of surveys each year. And we also do some of Canada's best employer programs. So we're the back end for a lot of the best employer programs, which it gives us great exposure to what's going on engagement across the country. But I think what's interesting about TalentMap is we do have some focuses on some niches. One is municipal and government, healthcare, and public service. So those are the areas we do a lot of work on, and that's given us great insight and understanding about the nuances that are happening within municipal government. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of that today. Just to give you, I know some people really like visuals, so to give you a sense of some of the organizations we've worked with in the past, as I mentioned on the top left, a whole range of professional services, some of Canada's top employer programs. You'll notice Canada's top 100. We do the back-end data collection and reporting for that for the last number of years. We also work in public sector, healthcare, private sector. But I did identify in the bottom left some municipal cities and towns and municipalities we've worked with, anything from City of Kelowna to Ottawa to Winnipeg to Edmonton, across the country on municipalities in government. And we even work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which a lot of you would be members of or active members in. So we've had great exposure to the sector, and hopefully we'll be able to share some insights today. Before I jump in, I did want to point out a couple of things. One is there's a real interest in engagement, and in fact, this probably slide or research shows when the Conference Board in the U.S. did a study in January of 2014 this year, they asked, what are your major challenges? This is across 900 organizations, public and private sector, and the top CEO or CAO challenge in 2014 was human capital. It wasn't customers, it wasn't operational excellence, it was human capital. That is the most important thing on executives' minds across across the world and in North America in particular. And not only that is interesting, but that same study looked at what do CEOs and executives and CEOs plan to do to address their top issue of human capital. Number one was employee training and development. Number two was a focus on raising employee engagement. So engagement is definitely at the top of mind for executives, boards, even counselors in municipalities across the country and around the world. So it's something that I think is very important to pay attention to. Now the second thing I want to turn to is employee engagement versus job satisfaction. We get a lot of questions about job satisfaction. Isn't it just the same as employee engagement? Isn't it just, you know, the old wine in new bottles type of approach? And what I do want to emphasize is employee engagement is fundamentally different from job satisfaction. Job satisfaction is very much a focus on what's in it for me as an employee, where employee engagement is much more of a focus on what's in it for we as the employer and the employee. So for example, when you look at a satisfied employee, they're really looking at what do I get from this employment deal. However, when you look at an engaged employee, it's not just looking at what do I get, but more importantly, what am I willing to give back to this employer? So whenever you're measuring satisfaction, you're just measuring employees' perception of their employment deal. When you're measuring engagement, you're measuring not only what do they get, but you're measuring an indication of their willingness to give back to the organization. An engaged employee tend to be a lot more focused, a lot more enthusiastic, a lot more persistent on problems, and will have a lot more adaptability to issues and change, which we're seeing a lot in municipal government today. So now that we touched a little bit about the difference between satisfaction and engagement, I think it would probably be helpful to define employee engagement. This is TalentMap's definition, and it's one we've used with different municipalities across the country. The more formal definition is the heightened emotional and intellectual connection employees had to his or her job or work or organization. But probably the best definition to remember on employee engagement is two words: discretionary effort. Employee engagement, when you're getting a measure of it in an organization, it's a measure of discretionary effort, that willingness of your employees and your staff to put in that extra effort that they choose as a knowledge worker to put forward. The actual underlying psychology of employee engagement is much more around measuring how people are connected logically to their work. That's, can I achieve my career and my financial goals at this organization, and how people are connected emotionally to their job or to their work or their organization. If we get these two connections right, people getting the logical component and the emotional component, then they're going to be behaviorally engaged, or they're going to provide that elusive discretionary effort that we really are trying to measure and focus on in terms of improving the workplace. What we find within municipalities more than any other industry is most organizations are pretty good at getting the financial side right. People feel that they're paid well, that they get good benefits. They don't do quite as well on career, but generally they're pretty good on the logical side. Where municipalities and government in general fall down is the emotional side. Aligning the values of what's important to employees to the values of their peers, their manager, and the organization as a whole. And I'll talk to that in just a few minutes. So really, in summary, if you're going to remember one thing, employee engagement is really a measure of discretionary effort. Now let's turn to a model that's been used in the private sector and is starting to be adapted for the public sector. This model was probably depicted best a number of years ago, called the service profit chain. And briefly, I'll just sort of outline the concept of the service profit chain. It started in the private sector, And the idea was improving revenue and profitability. That's a very typical private sector focus. To do that, you needed to ensure you had loyal customers, which is in part driven by great customer satisfaction. And we know that customer satisfaction is in part driven by the service value and the service quality provided by employees. And to achieve service quality and service value, you needed to have good employee retention. Employees had to stay there long enough to know what they're doing and be good at their job. And they had to be productive. They had to provide great service. And to achieve that, you needed employee engagement because that drove better retention and much more employee productivity. But to understand employee engagement, you have to go down another level. And you have to understand the underlying fundamental drivers of employee engagement. And that's where we come in as an organization. We help our clients understand not just employee engagement, but the underlying drivers of engagement. Things like comp, performance feedback, professional growth, teamwork, and so on. How much do they contribute to driving engagement, which then contributes to service quality, customer satisfaction, and revenue growth and profitability. Now, a lot of you are in the public sector, so you're saying, well, this model doesn't really matter to you that much. Well, conceptually, the model, I think, is very critical in both public and private sector, even though maybe some of these terms don't matter. The actual concepts, I think, are very important. And what we've noticed is an organization, well, it was really some academics, Heinzman and Marson, in 2006 said, well, let's take that concept of the service profit chain and let's adapt it for the municipal sector or the private sector, or the public sector rather. And what they then did is said, well, if you have engaged employees, that will drive better citizen services and satisfaction with those services, which then over time will drive greater public trust and confidence with public institutions. So this is, the linkage is known as a public sector service value chain. So the same concept that I showed in the private sector, just adopted for the public sector. So the underlying concept here is employee engagement is important, not in and of itself, but because it drives citizen services and satisfaction with citizen services, and that in turn will drive higher levels of public trust and confidence in the organization. That's the theory. Now, in practice, I thought this was a good quote from Auditor General British Columbia a couple of years ago when talking about why employee engagement was important within that sector. At the time, the Auditor General said, interested, motivated employees are easier to retain, they attract others into the organization, they provide good customer service, and they are more productive. So they really understood not just the theory, but what really matters in employee and culture and what can help drive the business within municipalities. Okay, now let's turn to some linkage work that we've seen linking employee engagement to better customer service outcomes in the public sector, both in municipal and provincial government. What I pulled up here is an interesting study that was done in partnership between BC Stats in British Columbia and the region of Peel. And they actually combined their respective data across employee engagement outcomes and customer satisfaction as measured in some of their citizen surveys that they did around services that they provide in their different respective services that the government provided. And I guess what I want to point out here is the data showed a strong correlation between customer satisfaction and employee engagement. So basically, as employee engagement increased, customer satisfaction scores increased. And we're looking at the BC are the triangles and region appeals are the, BC is the diamond and region appeals are the triangles. but you can see that it's a positive correlation, meaning as one goes up, the other goes up. And I thought that was very interesting because what it does, it starts to reinforce not only for municipalities, but it's data that you can share with your chief administrative officer, with others in your organization to show that employee engagement is not important in and of itself, but it can actually help drive concepts like citizen satisfaction. That same study actually looked at work units of high engagement and customer satisfaction scores within those work units. Now, it looked across something like 41 different work units, so the data was statistically significant. And what it found was those organizations that had high engagement also had much higher customer satisfaction scores. So 80% customer sat on the high engaged employees, where we only had 69% customer sat on low engagement employees. So we can provide a copy of this study if it makes sense and you're interested. But what I wanted to point out is the strong linkages between employee engagement and customer satisfaction. So, and the fact that engagement is such an important factor in that this linkage work wasn't done on the employee satisfaction side. There was very little work or correlation between employee satisfaction and customer sat. But what research have noticed, which has probably driven a lot of the excitement, is there's a very much stronger correlation between employee engagement and customer satisfaction. And in fact, this study went a little bit further, and it actually pointed out that for every 2-point increase in employee engagement, it led to a 1-point increase in customer satisfaction. So it actually came right down to a formula. And again, this is something that we strongly encourage you to share with your chief administrative officer, with your leadership team, because it helps you build the case that employee engagement is important within your organization and within municipalities. It is not a private sector initiative only, but it's something that should be focused on in the public sector. Now let's turn to why people stay at their jobs within the public sector and municipalities in particular. What we did is we looked at the top 5 reasons government employees cited for staying at their job. The number 1 reason was benefits. They're staying there because of the benefits. Number 2 is retirement. Number 3, job security. Number 4, compensation. And then finally, number 5 was the actual content or the type of work. So you can see people are staying at their work not because they love their work or they love their organization or they're engaged in the types of tasks that they want to do to help and promote, but compensation and benefits in particular are keeping them there. What we've learned on engagement research is that is fundamentally backwards. Let me show that in a little bit different light. When we looked at how do your benefits stack up, so comp and benefits within both government and non-government, and in fact we broke the government out to government unionized, government non-union, so administrative or staff within government, and then non-government, public or private sector. I get paid fairly for the work I do. Interesting in that the non-government employees actually scored that the lowest. My total compensation is competitive in our industry. Government union actually scored that the highest, and non-union and non-government scored it equal. And then finally, I'm satisfied with my benefits package. You'll notice that the government union scored it highest, followed by non-union and government, and then non-government scored it the lowest. So the message here is government's doing a great job at paying people and providing great benefits, and we know that, and it's well documented in a lot of media today, and in particular the retirement plan, but that is not the factors that are driving employee engagement. So the message here is to drive engagement, we're actually in municipal government and in provincial government pulling the wrong levers. Enhancing engagement through compensation and benefits is not the right levers that matter to an engaged workforce, whether you're in government or you're not in government. And let me point that out in the next few slides. When we looked at our engagement scores, this is what makes up the TalentMap Engagement Index. These are the 6 questions. I'm proud to tell others I work here. I'm optimistic about the future. Inspires me to do my best work. I'd recommend my organization. Sense of personal accomplishment, and I can see a clear link between my work and my organization's long-term objectives. What I want to point out here is non-government employees scored higher on 5 of the 6 engagement items than both government union and government non-union. So non-government employees, even though they're paid, generally perceived to be paid lower, or they think they're paid lower, their engagement is much higher. Whereas government union and non-union tend to be paid very well, but their engagement tends to be low or much lower. And in particular, the union side of the government, who tend to have the best benefits in job security, actually have the lowest levels of engagement relative to staffers or admin within government, and certainly relative to non-government employees. So there's a significant difference in engagement factors, even though government is paid better in terms of perception of the work or value that they add. To give you where the key differences in this engagement equation, what I want to point out here is when we looked at, I'm optimistic about the future of my organization, and senior managers show a sincere interest in employee well-being, 2 factors that are linked to engagement. And then finally, I have trust and confidence in our leaders' ability to achieve our organization's goals. Government non-union scored the lowest across all of these items. Sorry, government union. Government non-union scored a little bit higher, and then non-government actually scored the highest. They were more optimistic about their organization. They felt that senior leaders showed a more sincere interest in their well-being, and they had much greater trust and confidence in the leadership's ability to achieve the goals of the organization. So it's interesting. What we're seeing within government is they're paying very well, they're compensating well, the benefits are great, but the leadership, which is actually not a compensation item, is not near as strong. So it's the leadership that's driving engagement, not compensation, which is the only lever that government seems to pull most of the time. Now let me turn to some just fundamentals. I hope I was able to identify the fact that engagement and satisfaction are completely different. And in fact, the one lever that government uses very well, benefits, pay, compensation, is not contributing to high engagement. And in fact, there are other factors that aren't dollar related that are actually driving engagement, which are leadership items, and we see that more in the public sector, or sorry, in the private sector than in the public sector. The other thing we wanted to do is, well, if you are looking at engagement, how many are actually measuring employee engagement in the workplace? So we actually looked at a range of different municipalities out there, and we asked, do you have a formal survey process? Only about 30%, or about a third, said yes, they do. And about 2/3 indicated that they didn't have a formal survey process, so in terms of measuring employee feedback or employee engagement. So there's still a lot of opportunity. If you want to raise the awareness around employee engagement, one of the first steps is to measure engagement in an effective scientific way. And to do that, it's very critical that you think about the survey design. If you're going to go measure engagement and want to improve engagement, you want to make sure that you create a strong engagement index for your organization, and you can create different types of indexes. There's not one size fits all when it comes to measuring engagement. However, there are some fundamentals that are important that I talked about earlier. There should be a measure of how people connect logically or rationally, and how they connect emotionally to their work or to their job. Those fundamental ideas or constructs should be built into your engagement index, and you should be able to generate then a score for engagement within your organization. But that's only part of the formula. Not only do you have to identify engagement, but more importantly, you have to identify all of the factors that influence engagement within your organization. And within TalentMap, over the last 15 years, our research has identified these 12 factors as the most important factors that influence employee engagement within municipal government. Things like comp, which we talked about, work environment, is it physically safe and psychologically safe? Feedback, as an employee or staffer, do I know how well I'm performing? Am I doing a good job? Am I meeting expectations? Professional growth, do I have the opportunities to learn and grow? Teamwork, do we work well as a team? Do we share information? Do I have some kind of work-life balance in terms of demand? Do we actually improve the way we do our work? And do we focus on our citizens or our customers or stakeholders? Those are what we would call independent variables. And whenever we work with our clients and for any properly designed survey, you should have a survey that has both an engagement index called the dependent variable and underlying potential drivers of engagement called your independent variables. And the real work is not only do you have a high or low engagement score, but more importantly is how the fundamental drivers of engagement relate to your employee engagement index. Saying that another way is what factors are most important to your employees and how well are you performing on those factors. So any well-designed engagement survey for municipalities should have dependent variables and independent variables, and you should be able to identify, after doing the analysis, the top 3 drivers of employee engagement for your organization. Now, you can even get more sophisticated, and you can do drivers by department, drivers by government, union, government non-union, and so on. But the key factor in here is you should be able to identify not only are your scores high or low, but which ones are most important to your employees. And let me just show you that in one more slide in terms of the analysis here. This is an example of a government organization, and you'll notice in this organization they scored very high on comp, very high on work-life balance, pretty good on immediate manager. However, they scored very low on information and communication, low on vision, low on leadership. Anything high on the top side of this chart scored above average, on the bottom side of this chart scored below average. But more importantly is, how important are these factors? Anything to the right of this vertical line are areas that are very important to these employees in this organization. Anything to the left of this line are much less important. That doesn't mean you can take them away, but what it means is they're not as critical to driving engagement as the factors to the right. So compensation, work environment, work-life balance, all areas that government excels at, and this analysis shows, and this is about 400 people in this organization, they really don't influence employee engagement. They might influence job satisfaction, but they don't influence employee engagement. The factors that influence engagement are things like professional growth, vision, teamwork, leadership, information and communication. For this particular organization, those are the factors that are important, and those are the areas this organization scored much lower than other municipalities and government agencies that they were compared to. So this organization was able to identify very quickly what it needs to focus on to improve engagement, not to improve satisfaction, but to improve employee engagement. Now, let me turn to summarizing sort of some of the key factors, and we'll sort of wrap up here with some additional questions that I think have come through in the last little bit. So first of all, I think what I wanted to get across today is really to focus on engagement, and that it's fundamentally different from job satisfaction. Whenever you run a survey today, if you're running a job satisfaction survey, you are probably 10 or 15 years behind the current thinking out there and some of the scientific research that is really pointing that engagement is critical. Not only that, but what we've noticed within municipals versus private sector is engagement is really linked to how much you can trust the institution. So higher level of trust in the institution driven by higher levels of customer or citizen satisfaction is driven in part by the level of employee engagement. So if you can improve employee engagement within government municipalities, you can improve citizen customer sat, which can improve how much your community trusts your government. So hopefully I showed you a little bit about how a well-designed engagement survey can really understand what the key drivers are. Now what I want to do is to sort of wrap up and summarize what I tried to touch on over the last 20 to 25 minutes or so. First of all, what I want municipalities to do and what we find the most effective is to focus on engagement, not focus on satisfaction. And I tried to provide some tools like the service profit chain that linked what's important to the executives, like the chief administrative officer. How do you create better trust in government and trust in the services that are provided by municipalities? Well, one way to do that is to enhance the level of satisfaction with the services provided. So how citizens or customers would rate your service, would they give you a high rating and satisfied with that service or low rating? You can achieve high ratings. You can, in part, achieve high ratings through higher levels of employee engagement. So driving engagement will drive citizen satisfaction, which will drive greater trust in your institution and organization and service. And what I try to show you is not just measuring engagement, but understanding the drivers that influence engagement and the link of how those drivers are related to engagement is the real fundamental way of getting to the factors of improving engagement. The second thing I tried to outline is that employee engagement is not the same as job satisfaction. They're fundamentally different things. Engagement is much more focused on not only what do I get, but what am I willing to give back, that concept of discretionary effort. For satisfaction is just what do I get out of this deal. And the third thing is what I tried to focus on was municipalities are doing a great job around providing things that make employees satisfied, like compensation, benefits, retirement, work-life balance. However, they're doing a relatively poor job on providing the factors that engage employees. In particular, probably the biggest factor that engages employees is better leadership and management. And in fact, when we looked at the analysis, and if you look at the last bullet on this slide, public sector employees are motivated and engaged by making a difference. They're motivated and engaged with an organization that they feel serves the community with integrity. A lot of people join municipal government because they want to improve their community or they want to improve and serve the public. And one of the areas that leadership could really have a big difference is influencing and messaging and creating a vision for different departments to enhance this. And it also is a great recruitment message. If your employees really feel that they're making a difference, they will attract the right type of employees to your organization. So it's a great tool not just for enhancing engagement, but also for recruiting the right people into the organization. So hopefully I was able to identify sort of some differences between government and non-government in what some of those factors are, and try to show a little bit of the private sector seems to be doing a good job on things that are not compensation related. And I think the municipalities in some ways could learn from those factors that leadership, vision, communication, professional growth, those are some of the areas that municipal government could really improve a lot on. And those are things that don't necessarily cost a lot of money right out of the gate. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it over to Neil. I think Neil had a couple of questions that came in. and then we'll wrap up and talk to you a little bit about what's coming up at TalentMap in the next couple of weeks. Neil?
Great, thank you, Sean. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Hopefully this information that was shared today was relevant for a lot of you guys going forward. We've had a lot of discussions with municipalities over the last couple of months, and we've sort of tailored the presentation today to be able to fit what you guys are looking for going forward. And at this point, what we'd like to do is share some of the questions that were asked during our live presentation of the webinar, and hopefully you guys can take something back from this going forward. So Sean, with one of the questions that came in, it was based around a municipality that is looking to launch a campaign or looking to launch an engagement survey to try and drive engagement within their sector. One of the things that they're struggling with at this point is uniting their leadership team and their management, and in regards to buy-in and things like that. So one of the things that they're looking for is if you have any advice to be able to share on how to improve or go about getting buy-in in regards to launching an engagement survey.
Yeah, that's always an important factor, particularly from the human resource side, because often human resource are bought into the concept and understand the concept, but the management team isn't always bought in 100% at this stage because they don't understand it typically. So a couple of tools that hopefully I provided earlier on this deck is helpful. One is that service profit chain, but adapting the service profit chain to the public sector or public service profit chain and looking at how engaged employees drive better customer or citizen satisfaction with services, which drives trust and confidence in the institution. So that's one tool that you can share with your management and leadership team. Another thing that we often do is we get asked to come in, and we'll do that without a charge, is to do a short 20, 25-minute presentation on engagement to leadership teams. So the Chief Administrative Officer and the executive team or leadership team within municipalities, to give them a sense of what engagement is, why it's important, and why you should pay attention to it. Also gives them a chance to ask questions. We often do those on site or do those over a webcast. Another great opportunity to just have an expert come in and just briefly explain what engagement is all about and questions that they can answer around that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sean. Another question that came in is in regards to it's a municipality that currently does engagement surveys, and they're wondering, should high-level management need to give focus once a year to let the staff and bottom line see that they're important to them?
So the question is rather, should management team and the leadership team meet with their staff at least once a year to ensure that, and I guess, well, I'll sort of put it in the survey context first. Running an annual engagement survey, one of the things that we definitely encourage and try to lead our clients towards is sharing the results not only with the leadership team, but with the entire organization. And by sharing the results with the entire organization, it forces the management team or leadership team, after they've seen the results, to have that discussion with their staff. So to get out in front of their employees, to get out in front of their staff, and talk about how the culture is, what's working in the culture, what isn't working in the culture, and it's something that goes a long way to starting to build trust and confidence in the management and leadership team. Interesting story, we recently worked with a municipality in the Greater Toronto area, and when we talked about the importance of getting out and communicating with staff, they had indicated that they had not done that in a number of years. And the feedback when they actually got the management team out to the different regions where the field staff were, the field staff came back incredibly thankful and appreciative that they actually felt that they had a voice and that management was somewhat interested in the work that they were doing. So very interesting to hear that even though it's a practice that we see a lot in private sector, it's not as well established. Regular, systematic town hall meetings with employees across or right down to the front line in the organization. A survey is a great tool to act as a catalyst for those types of dialogues and discussions.
Perfect, thanks. And just one last question. This is another municipality that currently does survey, and this is a question in regards to after the survey has been completed. They're wondering at what point should they involve the frontline employees in the process. So they're wondering if this should be when changes come about or when they're making changes that directly affect them.
That's a good question. When to involve frontline in the survey? And what our best practice is to actually involve them at the very beginning. So before you, once the management team or leadership team has decided that they're going to head down and start to create a culture of engagement and that they're going to measure it on a regular basis, the first step after that is really to set up a steering committee or a group that helps questionnaire design, pre-survey communication, helps around the post-survey action planning, and so on. And we strongly encourage that steering committee or group to be made up of a mix of leadership and managers, union staff, frontline staff, and that enables both to gain different perspectives from union staff, non-union leaders and managers, and it also engages everybody in the process at the very beginning. And if there's obstacles, you can start to identify those obstacles well in advance of when the survey goes live. The last thing you want to hear from is your union representative encouraging their membership not to complete their survey because they don't feel that they're part of the process or it's going to be detrimental to them. So engaging the union early on, and one of the tools to do that is a steering committee to help drive the survey process at the very beginning, is a fantastic way to involve everyone and drive engagement at the very beginning before the survey even starts.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. And thank you to everybody who has taken the time to sit through and listen to our webinar here. I just want to refer you to the screen here, and you can see some of our upcoming events in the next few months. You can see that we're involved. It's your workplace conference at the Sheraton Toronto Airport Hotel in the late October. You can also see that we're involved with Canada's Top 100 in Vancouver in later November, and 2 HRMA events within November 19th, and then the OHA Human Resource Symposium on November 27th. And again, thank you very much for taking your time out of your day to listen to this webinar, and hopefully the information shared today is something that you guys can take back within your workplace. If you're looking for more information on what TalentMap is doing within the municipal sector, please feel free to visit www.talentmap.com/muni, and we'll actually be posting, we'll continue to post articles and relevant information for you guys going forward. Thanks again.
To contact us, or to learn more, just Google TalentMap, or simply click on the link below.